Hey guys, and welcome to the Intelligence Economy. My name is Samvi Sharma, as I'm sure you already know, and I hope you guys enjoyed episode 1, in which we discussed the relationship between AI and inequality. Let's dig straight into episode 2. So today we're going to be discussing quite a real question. Will the fundamental economic problem of scarcity limit how far AI can actually develop? And if AI will maybe even help solve the problem of scarcity? For my listeners that are a little bit unsure about what scarcity actually is, it's the idea that we live in a world where we have unlimited wants and limited resources. That tension forces humans to make decisions to choose what goods to produce, how to allocate them, and then how to distribute them fairly. It's the core problem that economics was actually built to answer. So, let's start with the most immediate way scarcity shows up in the world of AI. The hardware that powers it. To build AI, you need chips, lots of them, and chips don't appear out of thin air. They require rare physical resources and enormous amounts of energy and highly specialized manufacturing equipment. We will look into energy shortages later in this episode too. And so anyway, right now, demand for those chips is absolutely surging. A really telling example of this is what's happening with the Dutch company called ASML. And if you haven't heard of them, they are arguably the most important company in the entire AI supply chain. ASML make EUV lithography machines, the incredibly advanced tools to use to manufacture cutting-edge semiconductors. Without them, the chips run your ChatGPT queries or power AI data centers simply couldn't be built. And here's what's fun. No other company in the world can make them. ASML has a complete monopoly on this technology. So these machines are extraordinary pieces of engineering. Each one costs up to $400 million, and only a few dozen can be produced globally per year. So when chip makers like TSMC or Samsung and Intel all racing to supply AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, they come knocking, you can't just scale up overnight. The physical constraint is real, and it bites hard. That makes ASML what economists might call a choke point, a single bottleneck that the entire global AI industry depends on. Just last month, ASML raised its full year 2026 revenue forecast after first quarter results beat expectations, citing AI-driven chip demand that is outspacing available supply. Their CEO is the one who put it plainly as demand for chips is outspacing supply. And he warned that supply will not meet demand for the foreseeable future. Sales are expected to reach up to 40 billion euros this year, as much as 22% higher than 2025. Profits are up, shares are up around 40%, and even ASML's older machines are selling more than expected, which tells you AI demand is now rippling across the entire semiconductor industry, not just the cutting edge. Big tech companies are pouring over $650 billion into AI infrastructure, and the demand cascading down to chip equipment manufacturers has intensified beyond anyone's prior forecasts. If you want to read a little bit more about the ASML chip boom, I'll drop the Financial Times article in the description below. It's a great read and goes a little further into detail on the numbers as well. I didn't want to bore you guys with too many numbers, so have a look at that article if you're interested. But back to it. Here's where it gets really interesting from an economics perspective. And this is something I want you to sit with. The fact that AI progress is being constrained not by a lack of ideas or software, but by physical infrastructure has enormous implications for who gets benefits from AI and who gets left behind. Countries with access to advanced chips move faster. Companies with the compute scale to absorb these costs dominate. And smaller players and developing economies get priced out. The bottleneck doesn't just slow down AI, it determines who gets the lead. You know what? You don't even have to be an economist to feel this in your everyday life. According to BBC, Sony has just hiked their prices of their PS5s by £90 in the UK. That's a 19% increase, taking it to about £567. then the PS5 Pro will now set you back £790. So the gaming industry analyst Piers Harding Rolls told the BBC there was some inevitability to the hikes, attributing to a broader supply chain shock caused by rising prices for RAM and storage, both of which are in fierce demand as more AI data centers are built around the world. He put it plainly, with no sign of prices easing largely due to the demand for AI infrastructure, Sony will have to make the move to protect its slim hardware margins. And he added, it wouldn't be a surprise if Microsoft and Nintendo followed suit in the not too distant future. I'll drop the BBC article as well in the description if you guys want to read more. So the chip shortage driven by AI demand isn't just an abstract problem for tech executives. It's showing up in the price of the console sitting in your living room. There's a geopolitical dimension too. The US government is considering tightening export controls to China, targeting chip makers like Huawei and SMIC. If those restrictions increase, access to chips stops being a market question and becomes a matter of foreign policy. So we're already seeing, right at this early stage of AI development, that scarcity isn't just an abstract economic concept. It's playing out in the real time, in the form of a handful of machines in the Dutch factories that the entire world is queuing up for. Also, you know what? I wouldn't even be surprised if other companies such as OpenAI, Anthropic, and Meta wanted to start making their own AI chips, which is only going to create an increase in the shortage of resources. And we're already seeing new AI companies scrambling to lock in chip supply before they even have a product to show for it. Take Mira Murati. You might know her as the former chief technology officer of OpenAI, the woman who briefly became its interim CEO during that dramatic board coup in 2023. She left OpenAI and founded her own AI startup company called Thinking Machine Labs, only last year as well. And one of the first things she did was secure a chip deal with Nvidia, worth tens of billions of dollars. Thinking Machines has committed to deploying at least 1 gigawatt of Nvidia's next generation chips. And to put that in perspective, Jensen Huang, Nvidia's CEO, has previously said that 1 gigawatt of AI data center capacity costs somewhere between $50 and $60 billion. That is almost incomprehensible amount of compute to being locked up in a company that is barely a year old. What this actually tells us is that securing chip supply has become just as important as AI itself, maybe even more than AI is. It doesn't matter how brilliant your researchers are or how innovative your product is. If you can't get the chips, you can't build the AI. And as more and more companies race to lock in these deals, the competition for that limited supply only intensifies further. This also was something I read in the Financial Times, and I'll link that below too. Now, I mentioned earlier that building AI doesn't just require chips. It requires enormous amounts of energy. And that brings us to something that is unfolding right now, in real time, that makes this conversation even more urgent. So, as all of you I'm sure know, the war involving Iran has sent shockwaves through global energy markets. Surging gas prices are forcing countries across Asia and Europe to make desperate short-term choices about how to keep their lights on. In Asia, Thailand has restarted coal-fired power plants since the start of the conflict, while Japan and South Korea have lifted caps on burning the fuel as the war raises fears over gas supplies. And then in Europe, Italy has delayed ending coal-fired power by more than a decade to 2038. And Germany's coal plants have been producing more electricity than its gas-fired power stations since the war began. This is a textbook scarcity response. When one resource becomes scarce and expensive, economies scramble to substitute it with whatever is available, even if that means dirtier, less efficient alternatives. So, what does this have to do with AI? Well, everything. AI data centers are some of the most energy-hungry infrastructures on the planet. If the energy becomes scarcer, more expensive, and less reliable globally, that directly constrains how fast AI can be built and trained and then deployed. The chips are one bottleneck, energy is another, and right now both are under pressure simultaneously. But here's where it gets even more interesting, and this is something I find genuinely hopeful. So, analysts believe the war could actually accelerate the shift to cleaner energy in the long run. The chief executive of renewables developer EDP put it this way: the crisis reinforces the idea that we need to be more energy independent and renewables are more immune to shocks. We saw this pattern after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Coal got a short term boost, but renewables ended up accelerating faster. Global renewables installed capacity has climbed about 50% since the end of 2022 to 5.1 terawatts. And if renewables do accelerate, that could actually be good news for AI's long term energy supply. Solar and wind, once built, provide cheap and abundant electricity that isn't subject to a kind of geopolitical shocks we're seeing right now. But the short term picture is still troubling. This is scarcity hitting AI from two directions at once: the hardware to build it and the power to run it. Now, we've talked about the physical constraints on AI, the chips, energy, infrastructure, but there's another kind of scarcity emerging, and I think is just as important and arguably more controversial: the deliberate restriction of who gets access to the most powerful AI models. We touched on this last episode as well, but let me go from and look at it from a different angle. Let me give you a very current example. Anthropic recently released a new model called Claude Mythos, and I say released loosely because they didn't release it to you or me. They gave access to just a handful of trusted companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Cisco, and CrowdStrike. The reason? Anthropic said Mythos has such advanced cybersecurity capabilities that in the wrong hands, it could enable hackers to conduct cyber attacks at a scale and speed beyond human capabilities. So, here we have one of the most powerful AI tools ever built, and access to it is being rationed. Not because of a shortage of servers, but as a deliberate policy decision. That is a form of scarcity by design. And this raises a really profound question for economics. Throughout history, when a transformative technology emerged, such as electricity, the internet, even mobile phones, there was a period where access was limited to the wealthy and powerful before it eventually democratized. Is AI going to follow that same pattern? Or is the gap between those who have access to frontier AI and those who don't going to be a permanent feature of the new economy? The Mythos story got even more complicated when it emerged that a group of people had gained unauthorized access to the model through a third-party vendor environment. Essentially, a contractor used their access to Anthropic systems to tap into Mythos. Anthropic is now investigating the incident. It also follows two earlier security lapses. Details about the model, including its name, were found in a publicly accessible data cache in March. An internal source code for Anthropic coding assistant Claude Code was also made public. What's striking here is that even Anthropic, a company built around AI safety, is struggling to keep its most powerful technology contained. And that tension between wanting to develop powerful AI and being able to control who uses it is itself kind of a scarcity problem. The resource in question isn't oil or silicon, it's safe, controlled access to transformative technology. And right now, nobody has fully solved that problem. So we spent a lot of this episode talking about how scarcity is constraining AI. But let's flip the question. Because the second thing I promised you at the start of this episode was this: could AI actually help solve scarcity? And honestly, there are real reasons to be hopeful. Take agriculture. AI is already being used to analyze soil conditions, predict crops yields, and then optimize irrigation, meaning farmers can produce more food using fewer resources. In a world where we need to feed a growing population on finite amount of land, that is a direct attack on one of humanity's oldest scarcity problems. Now let's take in energy. AI is helping make renewable power grids smarter. better predicting when the wind will blow and the sunshine will shine, and balancing supply and demand in real time. That could be transformative for solving the very energy shortages we've talked about earlier in this episode. In healthcare, we can also say AI is helping doctors diagnose diseases faster and more accurately, stretching the capacity of an already overstretched medical system. When there aren't enough doctors to go around, an AI can do the work of thousands of specialists in genuinely tackling scarcity at its root. And in manufacturing, AI is reducing waste by optimizing production lines, predicting equipment failures before they even happen, and designing products that use fewer raw materials to achieve the exact same result. So the picture is complicated, and I think that's what makes this such a fascinating economic question. AI is simultaneously one of the most resource-hungry technologies ever created, and one of the most promising tools we have for making resources go further. It is, at the same time, a cause of scarcity and a potential cure for it. Whether AI ends up being a net positive for scarcity will depend enormously on who controls it, who has access to it, and whether the productivity gains it creates are shared broadly or captured by a handful of companies and countries. And that ultimately is not a technology question. It's an economics question. It's a politics question. It's a question about what kind of world we want to build. So let's bring this all together. We started this episode asking two questions. Will scarcity limit how far AI can develop? And could AI help solve the scarcity? And I think the honest answer to both is yes. Scarcity is already shaping AI in ways most people don't see. It's in the Dutch factories producing a handful of machines that the whole world depends on. It's in the energy markets being torn apart by geopolitical conflict. It's in the price of your PS5. It's in the deliberate decision to keep most powerful AI models out of your hands. These aren't abstract economic forces. They are real constraints playing out right now. They are determining the pace and direction of the AI revolution. But AI is also one of the most powerful tools we've ever built for pushing back against scarcity. In our fields, our hospitals, our energy grids, our factories, the potential is genuinely extraordinary. The question that keeps me up at night, though, is this. Will the benefits of the potential be shared? Or will the same bottlenecks we've talked about today, so chips, energy, access, mean that AI becomes the greatest concentrator of the wealth and power in human history, rather than the great equalizer it could be? That's not a question any one person or company can answer, but it is a question that economics, policies, and frankly, all of us as citizens need to be asking loudly and urgently right now while the technology is still being shaped. Anyways, thank you so much for listening to episode 2 of The Intelligence Economy. I hope this gave you a lot to think about, and maybe a slightly different way of looking at AI the next time you hear about it in the news. If you enjoyed it, please drop a comment, share it with a friend, and I'll drop all the articles that I mentioned in today's episode in the description below. And stay tuned for the next episode that will be coming out in a couple of weeks, where we'll be joined by 2 undergraduate computer scientists with upcoming summer internships at XTX Markets and BAE Systems, and we'll be discussing AI and its effects on the job market. You won't want to miss it. I'll see you then. Bye for now.